episode 279, Unix. Hello and welcome. Hope you're doing okay. Hope you're staying safe, taking the necessary COVID precautions. I know I am. I'm self-isolating at the moment. According to my COVID tracking app, symptoms I had a week ago means I have to, not go out very much. Not go out at all for 14 days. But I'm feeling fine. I'm okay. I'm still here, you know. I don't mind so much. So, this episode is about Unix. And it sort of comes, and I've probably mentioned this before. A lot of what I'm going to say I might have mentioned in other podcasts. Maybe not to a great whole lot of detail. So you're in for a real treat. But basically, people have asked me, I was going to be real cheeky here and go, people have asked me, how are you like this most amazing person, and how do you work, how you work, and how do you know these things, and what is it that you do, and how come you're just amazing? Well, I'd like people to say that, but they don't say how come you're amazing anyway. But a lot of people do ask, what work do I do? And, how did you get there, and why are you sort of in demand still now, as you're nearly 50? Shouldn't you be retiring? But it is interesting, and people do ask me that. They go, how are you still pretty much doing what you've been doing for the last 30 years? So I actually think it is quite interesting. So Unix. Unix is essentially the core of my whole career, really. Let's go through this. Let's see where this'll head. So when I was about 12, 13, I got a computer. I'd sort of read about computers, I think. Obviously there was no internet in those days. I'd probably read it. I don't know. There was nothing in school about computers, and I think I discovered this particular computer, the Commodore 16 with 16K memory. I discovered it really by maybe buying computer magazines in a shop. Maybe one of those treats I had every few weeks, maybe to buy a magazine. And it was a point in time where you could get like kits to build your own little computer, really just for the real geeks, But there was a little shift whereby they were becoming more mainstream. Now, they weren't PCs. Let's not confuse these computers with PCs. That would come later. But we're talking 1984, that era, 83, 84. There have been these kits to make computers anyway. But this computer was a ready-made computer. It had a really lovely keyboard. I remember that, and function keys. It had a really good programming language called BASIC. The downside, it only had 16K of memory. By today's standards, that's absolutely rubbish. But basically, if you want to do anything graphically, you used up like 10K just on the graphics, and you was left with like just a few K left, where you could actually write some code. So, and I had it for a while, not a great amount of time. I really enjoyed it, and it exposed me to quite a few computing concepts. One of those would have been hexadecimal. It's widely known now as base 16. And basically it's like the numbers that computers use. Basically means, one character can be up to F, which is 15, and 10, instead of being 10 as we know it, is 16. It's just a very efficient way of using numbers anyway. It's called hexadecimal. There's other ways. There's octal as well, which isn't that efficient, and obviously there's base 10 decimal that we're all familiar with, 1 to 10, whatever, So I had some exposure to a computer, and I did like programming. It was something I was sort of getting into. I seemed to have a mind for it logically. I remember in secondary school, and it was actually a maths teacher. There was no computer teachers then. He mentioned, do you know hexadecimal? And he asked me a few questions, and I did. I knew the answers, and I think that was the start for me. That was the start of this interest, this geekishness in computers. So basically, I went through school, and eventually left school. and didn't do very well in college. School I did pretty well. I got about, I think, 10 GCSEs. Good grades, most of them were A, B, and C, I think. I might have got 1D for, I don't know, home economics or something. But I passed everything, so that was great. I went to college, so I would have been 16 when I left school. So going to college, there was no facility in the school that I went to do anything beyond 16. You literally had to leave, And I went to a technical college in the town where I lived, which, you had adults as well. I mean, it was all ages. It wasn't just 16 to 18-year-olds. So it was quite an experience. And I think for various reasons, I became disinterested. Certainly in the second year, it was 2 years. And the second year, I wasn't that interested. The computer science, I did pure maths and mechanics, physics and computer science in my A levels between the ages of 16 and 18. And the computer science was rubbish. It was terrible. There was punch card on the syllabus. Now, we're not talking about the 1960s here, We're talking about the late 80s, So it wasn't a very good course, didn't challenge me, and ultimately I flunked them anyway. I did pass something. I'm going to be honest now, I don't know what I passed. I think it could have been the physics. I'd planned to go to do Manchester University and do a physics degree. I actually think, I'm thinking back, it could have been astrophysics I was going to do. And I've never been so happy that I never did that. I don't know, a life in academia really wouldn't have suited me. It was a bit of a... And at home, at that time, I lived with my dad and brother. It would have been say, 1990 when I left college, flunked it. And I can't remember. I think my dad worked, maybe my brother did as well. I think my brother was trying to get into college. He was arty. My brother's very arty. He's 3 years older than me. He's more of the artist type, whereas I was more of the academic type, But going by my A-level results, you wouldn't think so. But anyway, so to cut a long story short, I went to work. I found a job, And I found a job. It was selling air conditioning. I do speak about this at length. So it had nothing to do with Unix. I did it for 2.5 years, up till I think 1993. I'm not going to say it was a waste of time. I'm not going to say it was a horrible job. I'm not going to say I was an idiot. But I learned a little bit of how businesses work, but it wasn't a good period. It didn't advance me at all. But you do hold on to these things and hope you can make a deal out of it, and it didn't happen. So anyway, I was out of work again in 1993, and a job came up in a company in the town where I lived in Huddersfield, and it was to do with the production department, and it was interesting. I can't remember the exact description, but it was something like computer engineer, and I thought, wow, this sounds pretty good, Well, they didn't seem to be looking for a lot of experience, but they did have an entry test and all that sort of stuff. So basically, I turned up for the interview, and I remember the director of the company who interviewed me. He said, you wouldn't believe how many people don't turn up, and those that do turn up, those that do turn up, they're real scruffy. He said, but you made the effort. You're wearing a suit. This is a suit that I got a couple of years earlier. It's my interview suit. That's the only time it saw the light of day, But anyhow, I did an interview, and I think the initial interview was just a chat, and we was talking, whatever. And he said, if we're going to take it to the next level, you come for a test, whatever. So that was that. And I knew I'd sort of impressed him with the suit. I look rubbish in the suit, by the way. I think I can wear the right suit, okay. But this suit wasn't anything to write home about. But anyway, I was called back for a test, and I did a test with another guy, and ultimately I got a job with the company. I do talk about this at length in other podcasts, so I'm not going to delve too deeply into the testing process. I made a lot of mistakes during the practical test, the soldering test, but I still got the job, So this was the company that I worked for the next 7 years. And basically, it was the one that took me to all sorts of mainly food factories around the world. But what's very interesting about this company is that they had a particular product that involved a Unix server. So the bigger sites, the sites that had like lots of weighing scales, would have a Unix server. So there's a strange, I don't know what you'd call it. Was it destiny? I'd briefly seen a Unix system in college. I'd worked, when I was very young, I'd used hexadecimal and had an idea about machine code, So I had a little bit of exposure, and then I'd literally only seen a login prompt, I think, in college. But then to be drawn into this this role, and when you're very young and you're very new to a company, they do treat you like dirt a little bit. They assume you're an idiot, so you sort of really have to work hard. And thinking back, I really worked hard, without being an idiot, an arsehole about it. I was working quite hard, and I did about a year in this production department, and it was pretty basic stuff. But then I was invited to go into the software department, and that was a programming language of 4GL, And I think at one point they gave me a Unix server to take home and play with, but for various reasons I didn't have the root password, so I couldn't do anything. But it was a good lesson. So that was sort of my, practical exposure to Unix, and then every role since then. So since 1993, every role I've ever had, every job I've ever had has involved Unix. So what is Unix? I suppose that's probably the biggest question. When you've got an episode called Unix, you should really say what it's about. But basically, it's an operating system. We're all familiar with Windows, Mac OS, and I'm sure lots of people out there know about Linux and things like that. There was also an IBM, I think OS2 at one point. So it's basically a system where you can use a computer. It's the operating system. And the thing about Unix is it traces its heritage right back to the 1960s, DARPA and the American scientists and all the rest of it, It was written in C, which is a programming language, very low level. There's been variations of C since, like C++ and all the rest of it. And, lots of languages can maybe trace some of their heritage back to C. But it's very fast, it's very complex to program in, and that's basically what Unix was programmed in. And the first thing to mention is the early variants of Unix it was all text based, so there was commands that you type in and you get results out. There was no like graphics and Windows as we know Windows is today and stuff like that at the beginning. It was purely a language that was developed to be very fast and very reliable, So basically, after working for that company, I had some exposure to some IBM hardware, and they use AIX, which is their version of Unix. And then moving on to work for Hewlett-Packard for many years, and their variant's called HPUX. But as time's gone on, these big heavyweight Unix operating systems have slowly become more and more niche and less used. So HPUX and AIX, you may get in banks and stuff, and very specialized sort of applications. And what's really overtaken those languages is Linux, So, today, you may never heard of Linux. This could be the first time you've heard of Linux. But you could Google it, you could download it, and you could run it on your PC. You could run a CD, you could run it as live, this thing. And it's got a Windows. There's all sorts of variants of Windows for Linux, like X Windows, and I don't know what the other ones are called, but there's loads of them anyway, And you can use Linux. You have that accessibility, whereas back in the day, you couldn't have HPUX at home. You couldn't have AIX at home. These were like designed for their hardware for really important big applications. So basically, my career moved then really from using, and I have had roles since on AIX and HPUX. Even though it's years and years ago now, 10 years ago since I worked with any vigor, shall we say, on HPUX. They're still in use out there, and people are still in demand for those sorts of roles, but they're very much niche. What everybody does now is Linux. So Linux was really invented, I think, I don't know, where it was the late 80s, early 90s. Linus Torvald that invented it, and basically it's a very lightweight Unix that runs on conventional computers, conventional PCs that we have in our houses and stuff, So it was really lightweight. And initially it was flaky. It was rubbish. You would not put it in a data center. You would not use it in an enterprise environment. It just wasn't good enough, you know? But as time's gone on and times have changed and the number of people involved, because it brought about open source, where Windows and Microsoft, they kept their private code to themselves, you know. Linux was very open. And then you had developers all over the world working on these things, you know. And it's now very robust and very reliable. And day to day, I work on Linux systems to this day, you know, and I work on them every day. And you know, if you hear the words like cloud and, you know, all these sorts of terminology and, you know, stuff that's out there on the internet, it's built on Linux. You know, the cloud is built on Linux. So I'm in a very unusual position. I mean, the analogy I always use is my dad, and he was a fitter turner. So with metalwork, he used to use a lathe to turn metal, and he could also build things as a fitter, you know. But as he got into his late 40s, early 50s, he was getting superseded by CNC machines. These were like a lathe that would, you know, use a computer to do it. You know, computer numerically controlled lathe. So the operator didn't have to be a turner anymore. He could just be an operator. He'd put the piece of metal in, close the lid, press the button, and boom, it would make the piece. Whereas my dad used to do that, you know, full time, you know, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. He'd be turning these parts. His role had been superseded by a robot, really, by a computer. So he found it very difficult, you know, in his 50s onwards to work. And I don't believe he's ever worked since. He's still with us, and he's in his 70s now. But his role had gone, really. There was, you know, very few opportunities for him. So now I'm looking at my life and my career, and I'm at that point, pretty much. The point at which he no longer was useful, you know, in this amazing skill set that he had. He was no longer like, you know, we've got a computer to do that, you know, and it's cheaper than you as well, in the long run. And it works 24/7, of course. But anyhow, I don't have that because I'm now in a position whereby all my skills over the last 30 years, from Unix to Linux, are still relevant today. Because every bit of cloud, every bit of virtualization, you know, everything that we access, and whether it's Facebook, Google, whether it's the bank, you know, you do an online banking, it's all built on Linux. You know, it's all there, and it's something that I'm an expert in. So I'm actually probably more relevant today than I was 30 years ago, because without people realizing it, without the planet realizing, without the people on this planet realizing it, you know, you're accessing Unix, Linux systems every single day, whereas people weren't 30 years ago, you know. I mean, I know you don't see the commands and you're shielded from the servers. It's just a big fluffy cloud somewhere out there in ether space, internet's web space, whatever you want to call it. But underlying it all is Linux. Underlying it all is hardware, you know. And it's something that I'm an expert in, you know. So today more than ever, I'm in this unique, wonderful position. It's an amazing place to be that I didn't expect. I'm 48, 49 at the end of this year, 50 next year. I didn't expect to be more relevant now than when I was 20. It's incredible.